Hello, everyone. My name is Carol. I am the lead ACHD volunteer for Conquering CHD. I am here with Roslyn, an adult living with CHD from the Los Angeles area. We'll be talking to Roslyn today about her choice as a pediatric cardiology nurse and how having congenital heart defects herself led her to that choice. Hi, Roslyn. Thanks for having us. Thanks for joining us.
Hi, Carol. I'm grateful to be here.
Before we get started talking about your career as a nurse, why don't you tell us just a little bit about yourself?
Sure. So like Carol said, my name is Roslyn. I'm from Los Angeles, California. I was born here and I'm living here now, but I have lived several places as an adult. So that being said, a little bit about my CHD. I was born in 1983, and when I was like a day and a half, 2 days old, one of the medical people in the hospital heard a murmur. And so they did an echocardiogram, and I was diagnosed there when I was about 2 days old with my CHD. So I have a partial AV canal. So I had a hole in the top part of my heart, an ASD, and then my mitral valve was also affected. I've had 2 open heart surgeries as a child. My last one was, gosh, what year are we? 26 years ago. 27, 28. Wow, I don't know what year it is.
Time's flying, right?
Yeah, time is flying. But that being said, I lived a pretty, for lack of a better word, normal childhood, despite having my CHDs and taking medication every day. I sort of thought that was normal. Didn't realize that not everybody does this, and not everybody goes to the doctor as often as I did. But I then went on to become a nurse. I knew I wanted to when I was young, and I went straight into it right after high school to nursing school. And that's where I still am. It's the career that I was meant to be in. Yeah, and so I recently got married about 2.5 years ago, which is exciting. And I have 2 dogs, and I love hiking and camping very much. So I enjoy being outdoors, and try not to let my CHD limit me in any way, and just try to experience life, but still knowing that I have to take care of my heart and my health.
Great. Thank you so much for sharing that. That's wonderful. I want to go right into our questions that we have today. So you talked about, where you're working now here in Los Angeles. Can you share your career path in nursing with us and what different roles you've been in those positions?
Sure. So like I said, I went to nursing school straight out of high school. I first became a nurse in 2005. I began my career in the pediatric intensive care unit. So it was pretty high intensity, a lot of learning, a lot of critical thinking, and I was taking care of children right after any kind of surgery, children that were very sick and needed a lot of mechanical support or medications. And I was working with a big team. So I learned so much, and I just loved it. I loved being able to be there for my patients and their families in that critical time. And then 3 years later, I began travel nursing. So I worked for about 7 years. I was a travel nurse, and I've worked in at least a dozen different children's hospitals across the US, always with children, either in the pediatric ICU or the cardiac ICU, and sometimes the neonatal ICU, so right after babies are born as well. So again, with that, I've a lot of learning. I learned different ways of doing various things in different states, and like the medical systems in different states. And so it's been really rewarding. I also then dove deep into working internationally. So I began volunteering on medical mission trips, where we would go to developing countries and provide heart surgery for children, free of charge. And I would be in the ICU there taking care of those children after they had heart surgery. I've volunteered and then became an employee of the organization. It was Novik Cardiac Alliance. And I've been to 7 different countries, including Iraq, Iran, Ecuador, Ukraine are some of the main places that I would go. And it was again, so rewarding, but also a great learning experience. And it reminded me how basic medicine can be, and how really CHD just is across the globe and everybody's affected. I mean, 1 in 100, that's the key phrase here. And the reality, that's just the reality. And so that's sort of what really, again, like reaffirmed that this was the career I was supposed to go into, being able to be there and help take care of kids that were just like me in other countries, even if we didn't speak the same language. It was just really amazing. So then about 3 years ago, I decided to take a little bit of a step away from the bedside, and I began a job in the outpatient world. So I work in a pediatric cardiology clinic. It's been just about 3 years now. And again, a different role that I'm in, but an almost better role. I was worried leaving the bedside because I still really like that high intensity of like taking care of really sick kids and their families and being there in that moment. But I realized in the outpatient world, I'm actually caring for their kids and their families for the whole kind of life. Right. And while it's not in that high intense moment, it's every day. And that's just as important because it's like they still have CHD. They still need to take care of themselves in so many ways. And the families really rely on myself and my colleagues to help them through that. I'm a nurse coordinator now for the Pediatric Cardiology Clinic at UCLA. And it's, again, very different than being in the ICU, but also there's so much CHD in the world. And I feel like I'm really helping all the families that I take care of.
Great. Yeah, I agree. Being a nurse myself, going from bedside to an outpatient, it is a different intensity, but you also feel like you develop a better, longer relationship with those patients. And I think that really speaks volumes, especially in the pediatric world, because you see them grow up. And I think it's such I had the same fear of leaving that high intensity, and it was just such a rewarding decision. So when did you first realize that you wanted to become a nurse? Did someone or something specific influence that decision?
Yeah, so when I had my second heart surgery, I was 10 years old. And at that time, I was really interested in everything in the hospital and like seeing the medical equipment. And I wanted to know what things did and why they used certain things and what medicines were. And I just was really interested in everything. So I think at that moment, I realized, I really like medicine. And I knew I wanted to go into the medical field somehow. And I even remember my surgeon, I had my heart valve replaced at that surgery. So I remember my surgeon let me hold a replica of it. And I have this picture of it. It's, this big in my fingers. And I was like, that's inside of me. That's insane. And how does this work? And so I realized, though, from that experience, I don't have any bad memories from that hospitalization. I in fact, have a lot of good memories. And I think a lot of it had to do with my nurses. I don't remember necessarily being in pain. And the times that I do remember were like funny moments. And so I give a lot of credit to my nurses because I know that they were there taking care of me the whole time. And so that's where I decided I wanted to become a nurse and be able to give back in a way to my patients that would be like really special for them to know that, I've been in their shoes before.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. You have such a different perspective that's so helpful to patients and families. Kind of talking about families, like what lessons did you learn from witnessing your parents care for you and their relationship with your providers? How does that translate into your practice now?
Yeah, so my parents were always there for me. They both would go to all of my cardiology appointments. In fact, they still were going well into my 20s with me to my appointments. And that was because I was their baby girl and they wanted to know what was going on. And I remember like my dad would take notes and he would always take a picture of me with my cardiologist. every time. Just, the cardiology team, my doctor and the nurses there in the clinic were sort of like an extended family to them, just because I was there so often. And it's scary going in because you're not sure what you might expect. But what I realized is that I feel like the doctors growing up were always so, like, they would sit down with my parents and talk with them about things. Like, they would talk through things. They wouldn't just come in and like, oh, this is what's going on. She's fine. Okay, bye. They would like want to, if my dad or mom had questions, they would answer them. They would sit there and answer them. And I think taking that time with them, I recognize, oh, this, they actually care about me. It's not just, I don't need to be afraid of the doctor because they actually care. They're not going to hurt me or, anything like that. And so I think realizing that is important to me now. And then specifically, like I said, I have funny memories of being in the hospital when I was 10. I remember my parents had to learn CPR and they were practicing on, the mannequins in my hospital room, and the nurses were in there like teaching them. My parents were like, this is silly, blah, blah, blah. And they're like, no, you actually need to know. And they really helped like guide my parents and support them, because I think my parents thought it was silly in like this is actually real kind of way. They're joking out around to make it not so scary to them. But the nurses like helped them through it and comforted them. And so anyhow, that all there's so many stories I could tell that translate into how I'm a nurse now. I think what I love the most about nursing, especially with pediatrics, is their families. I want the families to understand what's going on. I want to be the one that sits there and translates, for lack of a better phrase, to the things that the doctor's telling them. Medical terms are a whole new language, and I want the families to understand what their child's heart condition is and what it means for their future and what it means for right now. And so I think recognizing that when I was a child, like, oh, my doctors and nurses helped my parents through that in the way that they needed, is something that I try to do through my practice now as a nurse.
Absolutely. And I'm sure that your experience with your own personal experience is probably invaluable to those families as well. Mm-hmm. So you touched back on about traveling with Novik Cardiac Alliance. Mm-hmm. So when you traveled with them, how did you prepare to be so far away from your providers? Even though you were working with a great team of docs, were you concerned about access to specialized ACHD care?
That's a great question. I feel like, how do I want to phrase this? Like, my heart condition isn't very severe. That being said, of course, I take medication every day, and I have since I was 10. And so there are various things that I need to do to take care of my health, but also that's just part of who I am. So I felt very comfortable going. And that's also because I checked in with my own ACHD team and made sure, hey, I'm going overseas for a couple of months. Is that going to be okay? And it wasn't really like asking their permission per se as to like, how can you help me make this happen? And they were, they're like, okay, we can get you medication supplies for as long as you need. So I always made sure I had enough medication with me for however long and longer than I was going to be gone. And yes, I worked with a team of other pediatric cardiologists and specialists. And so they all knew my heart condition. And so if there was anything that were to happen, they would know to be able to care for me. But that being said, I wasn't always with them. I have traveled internationally by myself. And in between medical missions, I would do some solo trips in other countries. And so I think I just mostly would try to keep myself safe and know my own limitations and boundaries. So like, I wouldn't go skydiving if everybody else was. I mean, it's probably not so dangerous, but like, for me, I'm not sure. And so I wouldn't, I try not to put myself in those situations.
Sure.
Yeah. So that being said, I feel like because I had such good care here in the US, and I also was able to email my providers at home if I needed it, if I had any questions. while I was gone. So having them as being like great communicators as well, and having such a strong ACHD team at home, I really felt like I was safe and secure while traveling overseas.
Great. I mean, just the work that you did, that's got to be just amazing to be over there, scary, but amazing. And just being able to make that difference in so many people's lives across, like you said, across the globe. So, working in pediatric cardiology, do you ever share with the parents or patients that you have a CHD as well? If so, how do you think that influences your relationship with them, maybe compared to coworkers who don't have a CHD?
Yeah, so I don't always share about my CHD, but sometimes I do, and I find myself being selective about who I tell about my CHD, and that's particularly because, like I said, mine isn't very severe, but that being said, I still have been there. I still have had surgery. I still have a scar on my chest, and so if I come across a patient or that has the same CHD or a similar CHD as me, I often will tell them. And it's almost like finding the right moments in which you're like, I've been there too. Let me tell you, especially like if someone's struggling, either with the diagnosis or with having to take medication or with having to have yet another procedure done or something like that.
Sure.
And so I do find that telling them in those moments does help ease their worries a little bit. In fact, I recently had a patient who was a baby. She was just a few months old and hadn't had surgery yet, but had really similar CHD as me. And her mom, after seeing them in clinic, maybe a handful of times, the last time I saw them, the mom looks at me and she like points at me and she's like, points at my chest, like, did you have surgery? And I was like, oh, I did. And so then a lot of times that's how I share it. The parents or child will notice like, hey, what's on your chest? See my scar. And so in that situation, that mom was just so like grateful. She got tears in her eyes immediately. And she's like, because she was so worried that her baby daughter was going to not be able to have a normal life because this heart condition is just, it's scary, and she's never known anybody else that had a heart condition. And so she was just grateful that she recognized that her daughter can grow up and have a normal life. Right. And if I'm there taking care of her, then her daughter can do whatever she wants. And I like to be able to express that exactly with my patients. Like there are limitations, sure, and there are certain things that are going to be a little bit different, but learning how to live with your CHD is the most important thing, not only for the child, but for their families as well. In fact, I have a story from when I was in Ukraine. One time there, one of the mothers, again, saw my scar, but of course I'm in Ukraine and I don't speak Ukrainian or Russian, the language they speak there. And so I went to see the kids once they're out of the ICU. They go to the ward, similar to here in the US. And so I went to go see some of the children that were on the ward. And I noticed that the moms were like chatting and pointing at me. And so one of the nurses that works there speaks English as well, and basically translated that they wanted to know about my heart condition. And they were just amazed, like, this nurse from the United States is coming over here to take care of our kids. And I think it really gives the patients and their parents some kind of hope. And yeah, and just like it's I'm able to, when I say, yeah, it sucks getting blood draws, I actually understand. Like, I've been there.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah, and so I think having that ability to relate to them on a different level can be very helpful. And a lot of times the doctors will pull me in and be like, hey, can you meet this patient? Because
sure. Oh, that's
yeah. So it's I think I've gotten closer with patients and their parents because of it. They seem to trust me more fully once they find out, because it's like, well, you really
get
know.
it, yeah, they know that you get it, and kind of what it's like being in their shoes.
Exactly. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I think too, I mean, I worked in adult cardiology, so I didn't have a lot of the acquired diseases that my patients had. I obviously could relate to them having surgery and the different tests and procedures. And I feel like they appreciated just that, being able to say, oh, I'm really nervous about this test. I don't know what to expect. And I think them hearing it from somebody firsthand, like you said, puts a different type of trust in you, as their caregiver. I think that, when they know that somebody else has been through it, like they believe you a little bit more, like, okay, well, this is somebody who's had firsthand and not just, watched it in a class or whatnot. So I think that's such it's an unfortunate thing that we have to go through, but it's also a nice advantage to these families that have somebody that can really relate to them.
Right.
What's been like the most difficult part though, working in pediatric cardiology for you?
Yeah, I think for me, the most difficult part, which probably is the answer for all nurses, is really the deaths. Losing patients, losing kids, specifically to CHD, is difficult across the board, no matter if you personally have it or not. But I think where it hits literally close to home is that could be me, that could have been me. And so it really questions my own mortality. And, there's likelihood that I will need another heart surgery at some point. And what does that mean to me? I think, I know so much now, and I know everything that can happen in heart surgery and the things they may not tell you. I just know a lot. And so I think about it often. But what I've throughout my career, when people find out I'm a pediatric nurse, they're always like, oh, that must be so difficult. How do you do that with the babies? And regardless of how difficult it is, whether they're really sick or not doing well or something, for what I've always said and what I really believe, like for the one loss, there is just dozens of miracles, essentially, of kids walking out of the ICU, of me seeing kids that were babies that were so sick as babies now going to kindergarten. Like that's a huge milestone. Whereas like, they weren't expected to live past that 1 year mark, but they are now growing and thriving and running around the halls of the clinic. And so sure, yes, of course, death is difficult, but there's also so many more rewards.
So have you yourself experienced any limitations or challenges as a nurse because of your CHD? And did your health ever cause you to consider a different path?
Yes, a little. So, like I said, I love my career. I know this is what I'm supposed to be doing. And so I often push myself really hard to work and to be there for my patients. And, I think they say don't bring work home, but I often do because I think about them. They have touched me in the same way I'm sure I've taken care of them and touched them. And, but that being said, for the first probably 8-ish years of my nursing career, I worked night shift, and that took a huge toll on me. So of course I started nursing in my early 20s. So I was fine. I had a lot of energy. It was fine for me to sleep through the day and be up at night. It wasn't a big deal. But then as the years went on, it became more difficult. I was really struggling to sleep, and it was causing other health issues. Normal things, I think, maybe not related to my heart, like headaches, and I would eat at random times. But over time, it really affected me, and I started getting arrhythmias and palpitations. And so I recognized that maybe this crazy schedule and not sleeping well is actually not great for my heart. And so I did have to take a step back, and really that only meant that, okay, I can't work night shift anymore. It's not good for me. So I then looked for jobs that were only day shift, which limited a little bit because everybody wants to work day shift because not everybody can work night shift.
Right.
But I was able to find a job eventually. And so just realizing that I had to transition out of working night shift primarily, which is actually I preferred. So it was a bit of a transition. So it wasn't anything too severe, but it was enough where I realized I need to listen to my part myself.
Right,
And
right.
I can't take care of my patients if I'm not doing well. So yeah.
So this is my final question for you. So I kind of always think about this myself, also being a nurse, having experienced both sides of the hospital bed, so to speak. What is the most important piece of advice you would share with other nurses as it relates to caring for their patients with CHD?
I think that the best advice I would be able to give would be to listen and to be there. So, and by listen, I don't just mean listen to the words that your patient or family member is saying, but really their body language, because oftentimes if you're giving instructions or explaining something to someone in a critical time when it relates to their health, they're not really listening. They can't hear it at first, or even if they do, they may not understand it, but they might still say, yes, yes, yes. Okay, no problem. But in their face and in the way they're sitting, they might actually be showing you, this is scary. I'm not expecting this. What does that mean? And, have a fear in their eyes or something. So I think really being there and like recognizing that everybody is different, and that's great, and that should be valued. But that means like just listen to your patients, and it's all about like meeting them where they are. And if that means that they can't or aren't able to hear you in that moment, that's okay. Come back a little bit and say, I will call you to follow up. But yeah, listening.
Yeah, that's great. And I'm sure, like I said, these, especially working with so many patients overseas, that really a lot of their nonverbal cues was the main way of communicating with them. You probably get so in tune to that, even more so than, you would. And I think that's a great trait I think that's a great skill that every nurse should really, take on, because like you said, what they might be saying and what they might actually be feeling, it could be two different things. Roslyn, I want to thank you so much for taking time to do this interview. We appreciate, the community appreciates what you do as an advocate and as a nurse taking care of our pediatric population, and really grateful that you took the time to do this interview with us today.
Thank you. It's great sharing, and I hope that it inspires some and provides a little bit of hope to some too.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. Take care.
Thanks.